Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to introduce Chip Marin. Chip, if you would you lead us off by giving us your name and the spelling of your name and your position, please?
Yep, more than happy to. My name is Chip Marin, ChipMarin, and I am the Programs Director / Senior Civilian for the United States Army Corps of Engineers Engineering and Support Center, Huntsville.
Thanks, Chip. Chip, thank you again. And first of all, on behalf of Cedric Davis, the Executive Director of Energy Huntsville, I'd like to thank you for your time in participating in our outreach to Huntsville community leadership and gathering lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. To get things going, what I'd like to do is just ask you a series of questions. The first one is before we get going into the questions, Brian, regarding to lessons learned from COVID-19, can you share with me your mission, your organization's mission, and your ability of your workforce to accomplish their mission?
Certainly. So the Huntsville Center of the United States Army Corps of Engineers is a little bit different than everybody else in USACE, particularly our geographic districts, because they're really focused on major construction called MILCON in the Army, and they're focused on civil works programs, i.e. the maintenance of locks, lakes, rivers, dams, and coastal inland and coastal waterways. So we don't do any of that in Huntsville Center. We are the folks who sustain, maintain, upgrade, and repair existing facility, utility, and infrastructure. So we're like a Directorate of Public Works for all of the Army, plus we do a lot of work for the Navy and for the Air Force and other federal agencies along the lines of a Public Works Director. So we have 43 different programs, and those programs touch everything on an installation or a facility. And again, it's the maintenance and repair. So we are predominantly sustainment, restoration, and modernization focused. And again, we don't do any new construction, nor do we touch civil works. Over.
Thank you. So at a high level, Chip, can you tell me how COVID-19 impacted your organization's mission?
Yeah, you know, I was absolutely amazed. If you had asked me before COVID-19, before the pandemic, if we could take 1,100 people in the Huntsville Engineering and Support Center, send them all home, and accomplish the mission, I would have said impossible. I didn't believe it was possible, because we operate under a project delivery team construct where project managers, lawyers, engineer technical folks, contracting people, the resource management people, they all work as a team day in and day out, and they sit beside each other day in and day out to accomplish the mission. So I didn't think it was really possible to take that team, split it apart, and have them all work from home. But the workforce absolutely astounded me. So quite frankly, it didn't impact our mission one iota. The team literally went from 100% in the office one day to the very next day being 100% virtual. We didn't phase out. We all went at once, given the pandemic and the increasing crisis. And so their ingenuity at finding ways to communicate, collaborate, plan, talk to stakeholders and customers to gather requirements for their projects, and to develop those projects, get a solicitation out on the street and award something, was unfettered. It didn't impact us at all. So just as a comparison, in 2019, the center obligated about $2.01 billion before the pandemic, with everybody being in the office. In 2020, with 100% of the people teleworking, we obligated $2.34 billion, so an increase of about $300 million working from home. So that, I believe, is testimony to the team's ability to continue the mission literally unfettered. There was not a single requirement that we received at any time throughout the fiscal year that we were not able to execute throughout the entire fiscal year. So yeah, I would like to tell you there was some impact, but there wasn't. There was zero and it's a testament to the resiliency and the ingenuity of the employees here in HNC, Huntsville Center.
That really gets me excited. I mean, that's really good news because I know the importance of the mission of your organization. So, in order to maintain productivity, certain organizations have had to transition their workforce to home. What unforeseen events arose when you implemented your work from home strategy?
Yeah, well, the first one is we all learned a favorite new saying, and it's sorry about that. My mic was double muted. Something we never would have thought about before. So the only impact, quite frankly, because the whole core of engineers, so 35,000 employees, pivoted at the same time from the office to home. So our virtual private networks and the core net that we operate on, we're not on the DISA net. The USACE has its own IT network. It wasn't able to handle 35,000 people through the virtual private network all at once. So you had to kind of pick and choose the time of day that you could get on VPN in order to work securely. And again, testament to the employees. Some of them would come on early in the morning, like 5 o'clock in the morning, when the VPN on the eastern side of the United States wasn't real busy. Some of them, conversely, get on there late at night in order to talk to people out in the Pacific and things. So they just changed their hours of duty, not the amount of hours they work every day, to accommodate the shortcomings in that VPN. It took us, the enterprise, about 90 days to get that VPN network upgraded. But once it was upgraded, literally all 35,000 employees could be on the VPN at once, and business continued unfettered. So that was the biggest thing. Thankfully, about 3 years before the pandemic hit, we knew we were moving a little bit more into a telework environment, or maybe even a remote environment for some of our employees. So whereas we used to have desktops, we literally did away with every desktop, and we bought everybody in this center, even our admin professionals, a laptop computer. So it was pretty easy for people to just literally pick up the laptop off their desk and go home and immediately begin working. Eventually, they said, hey, I would like to have a bigger monitor, or I need 2 monitors, I need another keyboard. So eventually, monitors left the office and went home, and we allowed people to do that as long as they were hand receipted for and accounted for. But besides that, you know, those are the biggest obstacles that we encountered, but nothing big and nothing that couldn't be overcome. So
that's another good news story from the center. So it shows just the resiliency and our ability to adapt and overcome. You talked about 2019's contracts that were awarded in 2020. It went up over 300 million in 2020. What other ways did you measure productivity by your employees from working from home?
Yeah, so obviously everybody puts in the time and attendance every week, so we know exactly how many hours people are working. But we really measure our performance to stakeholder requirements by number of projects awarded. So they're contract actions, whether it be a new contract or a task order on an existing contract. Those number of actions are how we measure performance. And quite frankly, we normally do about 4,500 to 4,800 contract actions every year in this center. In 2020, we did 5,500 contract actions. So what was happening, quite frankly, people are at home, they had their laptop, they set up an office, and they'd get on there at their normal start time each and every day. And they would try to get off at their normal end time each and every day, just like they would if they were in the office. Excuse me. But then what they were doing is coming back after dinner and logging onto the computer and checking their email and checking requirements. And so people were working till 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night just because it was convenient for them. They had the laptop, they were at home, there was no drive to and from work, so that non-productive time when you're working in the office, i.e. travel to from, actually became productive time at home since people didn't have to travel. So our actual performance went up during telework and not down.
That's another good news story to be able to share throughout the government, throughout the Army. So thank you. So anytime we do something different, a lot of times there may be a need for training. Did you see a need to provide any additional training to be for your workforce, being that you've changed location, conditions have changed, anything like that?
Yeah, so there was two tranches of training, one for our existing employees and one for the people who we hired while we were in 100% telework mode. So the first one for existing employees, the enterprise, our CIO, set up a series of training on the disparate communication methods available to work remotely. So with the ingenuity of the employees here, I'm telling you, they tried every virtual means of communicating that they could. They tried their phone, they tried texting, they tried Zoom, they tried WebEx, they tried Microsoft Teams, they went on to Facebook and started chatting. We use Skype for business. They tried it all. But the enterprise set up really two main systems. One was WebEx and the other one was Microsoft Teams. And they set up a series of training venues that were also virtual, so people could go online, watch those training venues, and then figure out not only how to use them, but how to use them to 100% of their capability, like Microsoft Teams. So you can see somebody on Micro Teams just like you and I are seeing each other right now. You can speak through Microsoft Teams. But you also can load up all the documents that you're going to talk about in any given meeting on Teams and use it as a repository for those documents so that anytime anybody who was a member of that meeting can log back into Teams and pull those documents down even after the meeting. Or then go up there before the meeting and pull those documents down and get them as a read ahead. So those training vignettes, particularly in WebEx and in Teams, were absolutely critical, not so much to the connectivity, but being able to learn the entire suite of capabilities in those two virtual systems and how to be productive on them. For our new employees, a lot of the new employees we get have not worked for the Corps of Engineers, or they're not coming from the Corps of Engineers. So our IT systems are different, our time and attendance systems are different. Our finance management systems are different. They're all unique to USACE. So how do you take a new person who can't come to the office because the office is closed and get him or her up to speed on how to operate on those USACE systems, specifically the ones they need to be productive? So what we did is we opened up only the lobby of our Building 475 Quality Circle here in Huntsville. And we set up a standalone workstation that anybody could come in on and do the mandatory training on that they needed to operate on those USACE specific training. And then once they were done with that mandatory training, right in that, using that same workstation, we would connect them with their supervisor. So the supervisor could have a one-on-one discussion with them to talk about roles, responsibilities, expectations, major events coming up, and what that person's responsibilities were in accomplishing work and how it was going to be measured. And then we issued them, before they went home, a laptop, a cell phone. We told them how to connect to the virtual private network. The laptop was fully imaged. And as long as they had a Wi-Fi at home, they literally could go home and become productive new members of the team immediately. So we did that in a socially distanced environment. We only did it in the lobby. We didn't allow anybody further or beyond the lobby into the building. And it was one employee at a time with one human capital specialist who set this all up for the new employee. But we found that worked really, really well. and it got people up to speed immediately. In fact, we were getting people up to speed quicker in a virtual environment than we were when we were all in the office, because a new employee would come in, see his or her supervisor, who would be in meetings all day long and unable to tend to maybe their needs on the spur of the moment. So dedicating one person to in-process and, oh, by the way, out-process people really made a difference. And again, it made that employee feel welcomed, and it made him or her a productive member of the team right from, not day one. Day one, they were getting all this stuff. So on day two, when they went home, they were rocking and rolling. They were ready to begin work. Over.
That's really good. I mean, I think a lot of organizations can take something away from that onboarding lessons learned. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Chip. So as we move forward, working from home, is this going to be a new reality for the Corps, or at least at the Huntsville Center, or do you see other solutions?
Yeah, well, there are many solutions. So the federal government, the Office of Personnel Management, has put out several guidelines on telework and what is in the realm of doable, not that you have to execute it, but here's the range of options. Certainly the Department of Defense has done so, the Department of the Army has done so, and the Corps of Engineers has done so. So quite frankly, and I don't say this to toot my horn or toot anybody in the center's horn, it was about June of 2020 when I realized telework is going to be much more prevalent going forward post-pandemic than it was certainly before. So we started looking into what are the options? How much can we really allow a person to telework? And we've arrived at what I think is a reasonable middle ground that satisfies employees' requests with our ability to accomplish the mission. So we created a more liberal, regular and recurring telework policy, which allows employees to telework up to 3 days a week, but they must be in the office 2 days a week. The 2 days a week in the office was a unanimous requirement from all of our supervisors and our board of directors, because they really wanted to check on people face to face to make sure that their health was okay, to make sure that their state of mind was okay, that they weren't getting claustrophobia, working in the house and never getting out to see people. So that was a unanimous requirement or decision by our board of directors. And I've talked to probably 200, 300 people who have returned to the workspace, and I ask them how they like this accommodation, being able to work from home up to 3 days a week and be in the office 2 days a week. And I have not found a single person yet that says they did not like that. They really like that flexibility. And actually, most of them like being in the office 2 days a week just so they can touch base with their teammates on this project delivery team face to face. And, oh, by the way, walk around this building and get to meet people who are not their teammates, but somebody they might need to call on in a month, 2 months, a year down the road, at least to put a face to the name. So we're at 3 days a week telework. We'll continue that indefinitely. We also have allowed people on something called a flexible or alternate work schedule to work maybe 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. So you get your 80 hours in 4 days rather than 5 days, and you have the 5th day off. That policy is forthcoming. The liberal telework's already instituted, and people are doing that now. The alternate/flexible work schedule, we're still working through, but we'll get that policy signed. So employees will be able to choose 3 days a week telework or work an alternate/flexible work schedule. And I'm going to work 10 hours a day for 4 days, and I'm going to have the 5th day off. So again, both of these are what I consider reasonable accommodations to meet the new reality of the workspace. The employees deserve it. They've proven they can accomplish the mission in a remote/telework environment. And so this gets supervisors and our stakeholders what they need, i.e. the ability to see people every now and then, to talk to them, to do, if you're going to do performance counseling, you don't want to do that on the phone or on a WebEx. You want to sit down and talk to somebody. So it really satisfies supervisors and the employees. So that's where we're at, and we're going to continue that indefinitely.
I think that's a great technique for the core, for the center. And especially in Huntsville with the tight labor market, I think you have to have something that's going to make you competitive. So kudos for the leadership at the center, and good luck on that implementation of that. I think it's going to be well taken by the employees. So with that, Chip, you've got fewer people coming to the office. That new center that you have is much larger than the old center that you were at 2 years ago. So how is the change in the actual footprint of the office space are you going to need? Are you going to take a look at that? Is that going to be something that, hey, you're going to be able to maybe move again, or just not use as much space? Or what do you think about that? How's that going to be, that transition going to work for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. At the same time, I realize we're going to move to a more liberal telework workplace. I also realize that because people might be working or teleworking, up to 3 days a week, we don't need all the office space that we have. So fortunately for us, not only do we have this big building that we moved into, we also have 6 other leased spaces across the greater Huntsville region because everybody could not fit in this building. And so we did a survey of the workforce, and we asked them specifically, if you're going to be teleworking up to 3 days a week, would you be willing to give up your permanent cubicle or your permanent office in order to share it with somebody, or to work for more like a cafe-like setup in order to telework 3 days a week? And resoundingly, the workforce came back and said, yes, I'd be willing to give up a permanent cubicle or a permanent office, and I'd be willing to share it with somebody in order to telework or go to a flexible work schedule. So when we added up all the numbers of how many people would be in each of the 7 facilities, the one big building and the 6 out leases, each and every day, we figured out that space-wise, we could discontinue the lease on 4 of those 6 outbuilding leases across the greater Huntsville Center. So we've already moved everybody out of those 4 buildings. 2 of them, the lease will expire in August of this year, and we'll no longer pay those leases. The other 2, just given the amount of furniture and things that are in those 2 buildings, we need until November, but in November, those 2 leases will go away. So literally, we've gone from 7 leases down to 3 leases, which is a huge cost savings for us just maintaining the leases. And it's also a huge savings not having to pay the leases. So at the end of the day, we're going to save about $350,000 in operating costs by shedding those leases on 4 facilities, and by allowing people to share a cubicle or share an office. So they, at their own level, partnered up with somebody they felt comfortable sharing an office with. It was all volunteers. We didn't mandate anybody do this. And so they picked a close friend or a close associate. And so when you come into the buildings now, you will see 2 names on a cubicle or 2 names on an office. One of the 2 names is maybe in the office on Monday and Tuesday, and the other second name is in the office Thursday and Friday, and nobody's in there on Wednesday. And so they just literally rotate in and out of that space. And so again, we're able to give up more than 50% of our facilities here in Huntsville by going to a shared space and by allowing this telework. And again, it's a huge savings to our operating budget, which for us is then a huge savings that we pass on to our customers who come to us for work, because they no longer have to help us pay the rent. Over.
That's really a good news story right there, Chip. And I know those organizations who are doing ESPCs or other projects, UMCSs, will appreciate not having to offset the real estate budget. So good news and good job on that. So with cybersecurity being such an issue, it's always been an issue. I mean, we're always concerned about safeguarding information, safeguarding the network. Is there a concern, or how do you see the workforce, protecting themselves or the network here in the future?
Yeah, that's another great question. And frankly, we're still struggling with this a little bit. So everybody's going to work from home. Everybody's going to set up their own little comfortable office at home. And left to their own vices, not maliciously, they're going to hook up stuff to their government laptop that maybe ought not to be hooked up to a government laptop. So I've got a monitor. It's a 14-inch screen, but I have this flat TV in my office space that's a 50-inch screen. So let me tie that 50-inch screen into my laptop. And that could obviously create huge problems on the network. So very early on, our CIO at the enterprise level came up with a set of guidelines on what could and could not be appended or plugged into any communications device, and that includes our cell phones. And we really pushed very strongly to get that word out to all our employees. And so they became knowledgeable of what could and could not. Really, it ends at, does that device have memory in it? If it has memory or some storage capacity, you can't plug it into a government laptop. If it's just a device like a mouse that has no storage capacity in it whatsoever, yes, you can go buy a mouse and use your own mouse at home. But don't plug anything in there that has storage or data storage capacity in it. So that was number one. Because the VPN was increased, as I said, up to 35,000 people all at once, obviously it only took one person to bring that entire network down if they did something wrong. So working from home security classes were instituted by the CIO of the Corps of Engineers to make sure everybody understood the vulnerabilities with the VPN and how we safeguard it. And then, of course, the CIO has its routine security pushes, patches, updates to software that occur all the time. And frankly, they were very adamant about make sure you download these upgrades and software patches, security patches, if in fact they don't do so automatically. And if you didn't upgrade your software or your security patches on either your laptop or your cell phone, you were given a 10-day warning message that you were about ready to be kicked off the network if you didn't. And every day from 10, 9, 8, all the way down to 0, you were given a warning, and on day 0, you were kicked off the network and you had to start all over again. So I think we had maybe 2 or 3 employees who actually got kicked off the network, and everybody, the word spread like wildfire, update your stuff on your laptop and on your cell phone. And quite frankly, we didn't have any more problems since that time. So it's a training, but it's a disciplining of the procedures and processes as well to ensure that employees are following whatever it is they learned in that training.
That's really good, and I think we're just going to see the tip of the iceberg when it comes to that training aspect of at home. I mean, the enemy's always out there; they're always trying to find ways to, get into our network, and so being educated is the key to success. So, yeah, kudos to the center again.
Hey, just one other thing there. So we also mandated that people could only connect their laptop. They could connect through their Wi-Fi at home, but when they were connected at home, they had to be on the VPN. They could not work outside of that virtual private network. And obviously that then provided a huge layer of safety over all the communications that anybody was doing on their PC, because they were only connected by the virtual private network.
No, that's good. That's really good. So we're coming down to the close on the questions, Chip. And one of the things I always like to ask people when I was a trainer at JMTC was, if knowing what you know now, how would you do things different to prepare for the next pandemic or the next event? We don't always know what tomorrow is going to bring, but by anticipating problems, we as leaders, we've always got to be prepared for what's going to happen in the future. So how is the team looking at the future in order to better prepare for that next event?
Yeah, so the first thing when I was reading through these questions before we get on the net here this afternoon is, how do you respond, and who is the team that responds to a pandemic or a crisis? So we've got the corporate board in HNC that's been a standing body for decades. We've got a board of directors that's been a standing body for decades, and we have a management coordination group that's been a standing body. What we didn't have is an emergency operations center. People trained how to operate an emergency operations center, what roles and responsibilities are, how do you get the large volumes of information that you need in order to respond to a pandemic, how do you sort through that data and make heads or sense of it, what's important, what's not, how do you communicate all that data to the employees. So we stood up an emergency operations center in March of 2020. But it was all people who had never worked in EOC before, Emergency Ops Center. So we had to train them on how to be an EOC, and we had program project management, we had counsel, we had operations, we had engineer technical folks, we had contracting folks. We had everybody in this EOC. Every functional area in the center was represented in the EOC. But again, nobody had ever worked in an EOC before. So quite frankly, I very selfishly knew I had a couple of retired military here in the center who had run an EOC before. So I brought in one of my retired colonels who had run an EOC for about half his military career and said, you are now in charge of this emergency operations center. Train your staff. And by the way, you can go and pick anybody you want in HNC to be in this EOC. So it took us about 30 days to get that up and the tactics, techniques, and procedures operating smoothly. But if I had to do it all again, and we've done this, you can't have a pickup team as an EOC that's going to hit the ground running. Impossible. So we have a battle rostered EOC membership list from each of the functional areas inside of HNC, that if we had another crisis tomorrow, they all know they're reporting to this emergency operations center. They're trained in what their roles and responsibilities are. And we haven't yet, but we also plan on continuing training in emergency operations type functions in an emergency operations center. But at least right now we have a standing by name list of who comes to the EOC, what the roles and responsibilities are. And about 80% of them are the ones that we already trained when we did this of March in 2020. And the other 20% are new, so we need to get that other 20% up. So that's the biggest thing, is being able to immediately stand up an emergency operations center, and it can't be a pickup team. You have to train them. They have to know who they are, and they need to be prepared on the moment's notice. The other piece is battle rhythm of meetings. So I talked about the VPN problems earlier on when we first started the whole core, 35,000 people on telework. Because of that, the limitations on VPN at that time, it became apparent that our core hours, C-O-R-E hours, the people have to be working. And this was built under the construct they're all going to be in the office. Didn't necessarily work well in a virtual environment. Number one, because of the early on communications limitations. But number two, a lot of customers who are out in the Pacific or in Europe, they're on a completely different time zone. And so why should not our employees work on that same time zone as the customers they're servicing? So the other thing we learned is we don't have to be so rigid in our core hours that people must be on the net or must be in the office working. if somebody's working at 10 o'clock at night, Central Time, and they're working with somebody in the Pacific, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as the mission is being accomplished and the customer requirements are being fulfilled, it's good enough. In fact, the customer requirements are being better filled because you can talk to them while they're awake and while you're awake. So we have changed our core hours to provide a lot more flexibility in them, allowing employees, as long as they work 8 hours in a 24-hour period, to work when it's best for them and when it's best for their customer. Obviously, also working 100% telework, people had to do something with their kids if they had kids at home. You couldn't drop them off at childcare anymore. And so the children need to be tended to. They needed to be homeschooled. Some people have elderly parents that needed to be cared for, and you couldn't get home care coming into your home during the pandemic, particularly early on, the first 6 months of the pandemic. So allowing core hours to be more flexible, more amenable, as long as the mission gets accomplished, was the second biggest lesson learned, and things that we're doing to change this workspace or workplace to allow more flexibility to our employees, and, oh, by the way, to better service our stakeholders and our customers.
Chip, that's some really good information. And I think you were talking about flexibility with the workforce at home and having an understanding that life doesn't just stop just because you've got a meeting, and with family and how things were with the pandemic, kids were, being homeschooled. As you know, I have 5 little ones, so that's always a challenge. And being blessed that we even have, my in-laws were down the road, but the challenge was that, they had to be isolated because they were at high risk. So all these things come into play, and having, an employer, having, an organization who's understanding, who's willing to work with the workforce, I think that says a lot about your organization, and kudos to that. And I know that the workforce really appreciated that, because I've talked to a lot of your program managers, and I know that they were able to accomplish that mission because of the culture that your team presented there. So kudos to that, Chip. So so last thing is, I'm just going to sort of leave it open. Anything left that you would like to share with the Huntsville community? Just lessons learned, last lesson learned that you'd have, giving you the last say.
Yeah, I do have one other thing. So this is Chip Marin's personal own biggest takeaway from COVID-19 and everybody telework. You can get the work done. I just cited your numbers on contract actions, on obligations. The work can be accomplished. I am convinced of it, even if we never came back into the workplace. What's missing, however, is what I call the social professional development of our employees. So you and me are looking at each other right now through a camera on a laptop. And I can hear the inflection of your voice. I can see your body language, but I can't see all of it, and I can't hear all of it. I don't know who's sitting to your right. I don't know who's sitting to your left necessarily. I don't know who else might be in that room that's pertinent to this conversation you and I are having. I'm not standing up in front of a room of 100 people giving a presentation and watching 100 people looking back at me. So this professional development and professional socialization, as I call it, is something we must do to create the future leaders of the Corps of Engineers, our Army, and our federal government in the future, going forward in the future, excuse me. And I don't believe that you can do that virtually. The social professional development of employees, and I don't care if you're a brand new employee or an employee who's been around for 30 years, because you can lose this skill quite quickly if you're cooped up in a house just working, teleworking all the time, of being able to communicate, collaborate, reach consensus with others cannot be something, it can only be done by being in a room with other people and being able to develop a skill and the art of looking at people, of not being afraid of standing up in front of a group of 100 people and giving a briefing, of being able to look for body language, to listen to inflection in somebody's voice so you know how to shape the next sentence coming out of your mouth based on that body language. You can't do it virtually. So that's another reason that I think coming back to the workspace 2 days a week is really, really important. And what I've asked my subordinate supervisors to do is during the 2 days that somebody's back in the workplace, we've got 15 months of catch-up time on a lot of our new employees who arrived at HNC while we were all teleworking. We've got to catch up. You know, these folks may have come here as a GS 9, 11 maybe. They're going to be the next 12s, 13s, and 14s in this center, and they will have never stood up in front of a group of 100 people and given a presentation. How do we catch up? How do we develop and quick start and truncate the learning from a social professional development perspective? I think it's critically important. You can't communicate well, you can't be a leader, you can't be a supervisor if you don't have those social professional skills. And again, it's Chip Marin's own opinion, you cannot get those virtually. So I think all of us, literally all of us, really need to look at what did we miss? What are these young employees missing? What did the older employees maybe lose a little bit of as part of their social professional development? And then, oh, by the way, and the most important part is, how do we get caught up and how do we ensure that they are professionally developed from a social perspective to be the future leaders of tomorrow? Over.
Chip, I think that's a great point. We humans are social animals, and we have, and especially, you know, and probably other places in the U.S., but down south, we're very social. We like to give each other hugs, shake hands, you know, collaborate, you know, be a team. We like to be competitive. And it's hard to do that when you're, like you said, virtual. So that's a great point, and that's something I think that we need to look at and how to address that. And part of that goes back to how we're mentoring and training the future leaders. And I think that you're talking about something that's at the tip of the iceberg that government's going to have to look at, companies are going to have to look at. And I appreciate you bringing that up. So Chip, do you have anything else to say? If not, I'm going to close it off here.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I don't know if there's a chance for others who are going to do the same thing I did here today to share and get back online. Maybe I'll talk to one another and share some of these lessons amongst us. I think that would be a good thing. So I do want to end by saying that the Huntsville Center is open for business. We're up to 50% of our population back into the workspace. Once the Redstone Arsenal commander declares a lesser stringent health protection condition, which is HPCon alpha for us in the government, we will go to 100% return to the workspace. Not that 100% will be in the building any given day of the week, because 3 days a week they're going to be teleworking, or maybe on a flexible work schedule. But nonetheless, as soon as we get to HPCon alpha, the less stringent health protection condition, we will return to 100%. We were going to do that right after the 4th of July holiday, starting on the 6th of July. Unfortunately, the right conditions have not been met as far as health protection condition levels go. So as soon as we go from what is currently Bravo to Alpha, HNC will be 100% open for business. But we already are, and employees can come and go on any given day based on mission requirements. And that's all I have. Again, I want to say thanks for the opportunity. It's been a great opportunity. I appreciate it.
Chip, again, thank you on behalf of Cedric Davis and the Executive Director of Energy Huntsville. I really appreciate spending your time sharing with us the lessons learned from the center. And I will make sure that we look at trying to bring individuals together so we can have some type of collaboration work center for lessons learned on this. I think it's a great idea. So With that, signing off.
Thank you very much. Stay well,
Thank
everybody.
you.